Great. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us here in person, and welcome to everyone who's viewing online, streaming. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Professor Anne-Marie Mai, professor in the Department for the Study of Culture at the University of Southern Denmark. She's also the head of the board of the Danish Writers Academy, professor at the Danish Aging Research Center, a chair at the Danish Institute for Advanced Study, project manager in human health, and a founding member and principal researcher with the Center for Uses of Literature, a Niels Bohr professorship program here at SDU. So as these titles can already attest, Anne-Marie's extensive work has put her at the forefront of interdisciplinary studies to a degree I think really few of us can match. Her work spans not only Danish and Nordic literatures, but also, among other things, literary historiography, narrative medicine, human health, and as we'll hear, I think, a bit about today, Bob Dylan studies. Her work showcases, I think, not only her ability to contribute to individual academic subjects, but to actually really define entire fields of study and emerging fields of study. She has published several books that have shaped the reception of contemporary Danish literature over the last several years. For example, her most recent text, Danish Literature of the 20th and early 21st Century. In addition, she's been instrumental in turning SDU into a leading institution in the field of narrative medicine. Her edited volume on illness and literature, for example, is used to teach medical students right here at the university. So this is really just blazing a new trail. It's very exciting. On the subject of Bob Dylan, Anne-Marie is the editor of New Approaches to Bob Dylan, which came out in 2020, the author of Bob Dylan the Poet, which was released in 2018, and is a board member at the brand new Institute for Bob Dylan Studies at the University of Tulsa. So I can only really scratch the surface of her record in the short time I have to introduce her, but I can say as a colleague of Anne-Marie's for several years now that the passion she really brings to her work is exceptional and really inspiring, I think, for me as a scholar. Her talk today, I Contain Multitudes, links together several of these passions and their expression through her work with the Center for Uses of Literature, a project funded by the Danish National Research Foundation that has run for 5 years and will conclude early next year. And with that, I turn to Anne-Marie.
Thank you so much, Brian. It was so kind words that I'll remember. It was very nice to listen to this introduction. Yes, and thank you for the opportunity to lecture on my contribution to and my outcome of the management of the research project Uses of Literature, which is funded by the National Danish Research Foundation. Professor Rita Felski has been the leading Niels Bohr professor of the project, and we've been working on this major research project for 5 years by now. We've had more than 20 participants and several guest researchers. Here, 6 months before the end of our project, we can look back on a number of publications, numerous seminars, conferences, and the creation of new projects and research networks. Professor Felski has already given a lecture on her literary research here at DIAS. She has been the primary source of inspiration for us, and her work has heightened the quality and impact of the research that we have conducted. My lecture today, I'll allow myself to focus on the contributions that I myself have made and the benefits I've received from my leadership and from my participation. The headline of my lecture is a quotation of the American poet Walt Whitman, "I contain multitudes." And this could be a characterization of literature itself. Literature contains multitudes, and the multitudes of literature are what interests me. In Uses of Literature, we have worked with many different literary genres, many different literary situations, literature in several languages, and we have welcomed a large number of guest researchers. Just a short outline of our achievements, and I think I'll highlight the following. The development and financing of new research projects. Associate Professor Jon Helt Haarder has a brand new project on the ghetto literature in Denmark, and Associate Professor Emily Hock has a wonderful project on a new literary history of women's work. So there are a lot of new research projects coming out of this our cooperation. and also new international contacts that we have established. I think we have had high impact publishing and very prestigious invitations. We have been engaged also in developing new study programs. The English and also the Danish study program have been influenced by this project. We also designed new career elective in cooperation between literature, cultural studies, and history. And this elective actually opens tomorrow, cultural heritage. We have developed new disciplines in cooperation with health studies, especially within narrative medicine, and we have designed continuing training for healthcare professionals. My old father always hoped that I would become a pharmaceutical chemist. He kept on with that, and as you know, there are famous poets who have this background. I think Keats was a chemist, but I didn't fulfill his ambition. But uses of literature has meant that I have become one of the lecturers at the continuing professional training of pharmacists in narrative medicine. And that's very interesting, funny, and to me means a lot. Let's have a look at our research questions. I do not have time to present all the different research topics that we have worked on and all the projects that we have developed, but overall we focus on these research questions. What are the uses of literature? What does literature do? How is literature a social factor? Why does literature matter? How can literary studies better engage the public? And our hypotheses, I cannot develop them very far, but I can just mention that we see it this way. Literature has many uses. That is one of our hypotheses: knowledge, entertainment, empathy, escape, recognition. And we do not understand use in an instrumental way. Engagements with literature are often very varied and unpredictable. And literature can address politics, for instance, gender, class, migration, public health. But it is also about attachment, about enjoyment and identification. And readers' experience of literature, in our opinion, are key to an account of its value. Just think of the last novel that you read. Did it engage you? Did you get new knowledge? Was it an escape from your everyday life? Or what use did you experience? That has interested us. And just shortly on our methods, we stress the distinctiveness of literature, its form, the pleasure it offers, and we look at literature in relation to readers, to public, and institutions. And we are interested in connecting the humanities to the social sciences. And we have several relevant methods, but actor network theory, reader reception, and pragmatism are some of the methods important to us. I'll just show you the structure of the research group. I won't go into that, but I'm sure you will recognize several colleagues here, also some present today. You already met Brian Yassel, and we organized our project in these work packages as we always do with major research projects. And it has been very inspiring to work together with wonderful young colleagues from many countries. You have already met Rita Felski. I'll just underline her international background, and we have had a great experience of her network, and she's been most generous in sharing her network with us. She is the author of several important research dissertations, Beyond Feminist Aesthetics, The Gender of Modernity, all dissertations that anticipate many of the discussions that we are in the middle of today. But when she came here, she was perhaps most famous for two dissertations: The Uses of Literature and The Limits of Critique. And I won't go far into this, but just mention that in these dissertations, she is rethinking the purpose and the practices of criticism. And they are written in a very engaging way. You really feel that she addresses you and that she's also entertaining as a writer. And while she has been here, she has worked on this wonderful book, Hooked, Art and Attachment. And in this book, she draws examples from literature, film, music, and painting. And she examines simply the language of attachment. And Hooked returns to the fundamental of aesthetic experience, showing that the social meaning of artwork are generated not just by critics, but also by responses of the audiences. It has had a great reception and also has been very debated all over the world, this new dissertation that she published, Hooked. Let's have a look at my contributions. I'll describe my contributions and my outcomes here. I'm a literary historian. What I've learned from this project and my outcome concerns new concepts of literary history and also the uses of literature in contemporary Danish contexts, narrative medicine, and new approaches to Bob Dylan's songs and artwork. And I'll return to these contributions. But just show you some of the recent books that I've published and edited for the last part of the project. The Danish literature in the 20th and 21st century. Very soon I'll publish volume 1 of this 2-volume work dissertation, and that's about the early Danish literature. And I have contributed and co-edited to an anthology on narrative medicine it's already published in Danish, and very soon it will also be published in English. And here my co-editors were Professor Helle Ploug Hansen and Associate Professor Anders Juel Rasmussen, both from the SU. I edited an anthology, Uses of Literature, Litteratur i brug, on the theoretical framework of our project and on how literature is used by various institutions as the schools, the church, and for instance also by psychology. And on its way is this new monograph, Litteraturland in GPS, Land of Literature, a GPS I call it, and it's going to be released in November. When Uses of Literature started, I'd been working on research and renewals of literary history, writing, historiography for a long time. My criticism of traditional Danish practice was that literary history tended to end up as a kind of answer book, a list of portraits of canonized author, rather than getting at the historical dynamic. Danish literary history, in my opinion, had become some kind of box thinking. And I wanted to turn literary history into an exciting landscape where you could make new discoveries. And Rita Felski's ideas on literary history summed up my experiences and ideas, and it gave me a theoretical frame to what I've been trying to do. On basis of the sociologist Bruno Latour's ideas, literary works and texts can be described as moving phenomenons rather than strictly defined study objects that the audience and the critics stand in front of. They are movable phenomenon, moving phenomenon. One could also look at how works are in exchange and interweaving with other texts and how they can be described as phenomenons that circulate between authors, readers, critics, and artists. According to Latour, the actor network theory is not a theory, but rather a method for describing phenomena, and I use it as a starting point for my readings. The networks are active networks consisting of both human and non-human actors, and Latour considers an actor to be something that can act or that is giving the opportunity to act. An actor can be anything. It can be an author, it can be a book, but it can also be a metaphor in a song or the rhyme of a poem. I want to give you 3 examples of how this concept that literary history is not a box and the idea of literary actors became inspiring to me. First, I'll have a look at the age of Romanticism, where this woman published her first stories, and this concept of actors of literature helped me to understand the complexity of the upcoming of a modern literary culture. The actor concepts opened to an understanding of how a network of actors promoted a change of literature and literary culture. Romanticism was not just about Oehlenschläger writing one poem and reading it aloud to Stephens. No, it was also about a network consisted of a new type of literary journals, new use of personal letters as a literary genre, a new staging of a modern type of readers in the stories, and of new portrayals of everyday life of citizens. Gyllenborg published anonymously, and she has often been neglected by Danish literary historians. But the concept of actors reveals her enormous involvement and importance to the upcoming of a modern literary culture in Denmark. The second example is an example of how literature can be an action and an entrance to society. And here I'll point to this author, this poet, Jeppe Aakjær. He published his poem Jens the Roadman on the front page of a journal in 1905, and the poem's protest against social injustice was an entrance to the public for a knowledge of hardworking poor people that had been neglected. The poem became very well known and influential, and a kind of signature of the idea of a need of an extensive social reform and of the idea of a Danish welfare state. And I'll just quote a few stanzas from this poem that has been translated by my friend John Irons. I'll just take the first stanza and the 2 lasts. Who's sitting by the shelter with hands where rags do cling, with eye patch made of leather and shoes held on with string? 'Tis none but Jens the Roadman, who must, shall he be fed, transform with his own hammer the hard stones into bread. And then we hear a description of his hard work with the stones. And the poem ends like this. And so he soothes for others the road that's hard to go. But when it came to Christmas, his arm said to him, no. 'Twas some but Jens the Roadman, his hammer fell from sight. They bore him over the heath on a cold December night. There stands within the churchyard a board now half decayed, that skulls ubiquitously sideways, its paintwork faint and frayed. 'Tis none but Jens the Roadman, his life was full of stones, but in his grave they gave him not one to mark his bones. So it's translated this poem of Jens the Roadman, who is is an action and an entrance to society for social experiences. And the last example will be literature as an acting object. And here I'll mention this wall from 2020, created by the poet Morten Søndergaard. You can see it in Valby, and it's a monumental poem that drifts with light across a gable in Valby in the suburb of Copenhagen. And the poem is based on 117 dreams and wishes of the people who live inside this building. It looks like this at night. And so you can read, I dream of cake, I dream of peace. I dream of a happy future for my children. I dream on a holiday. I dream of going away or something. And it's all these sentences that was made by the people who live there that lights up the night in Valby. A wonderful creation in my opinion. Yeah, then I'll turn to my new anthology in contemporary literature. This was the impact to me as a literary historian and also as a researcher studying contemporary literature. I've been influenced heavily by Rita. And this is a new volume that I'm going to publish very soon, Land of Literature, a GBS I call it. And I call it so because there are so many good books being published, and they disappear almost immediately out of sight. As soon as the media stops writing about them, we lose interest in them. And I'm trying to counteract this memory loss by creating this vast landscape of Danish literature from the last half century and give ideas for reading and study. Land of Literature at GBS shows that literary works are mobile and create unexpected alliances and escape over the spiritual fences that research and critique sometimes create. Land of Literature contains suggestions for assignments that can be used in literature teaching at several levels. And I'll just mention 3 of the works that are important in this land of literature. First, Torkel Bjørnvigs poems on environment from the 70s, and then this contemporary young prize-winning author, Jonas Eika, who has published a series of short stories, and this novel by a young Danish author, All the Birds of the Heaven, Rachel Haslund Gjerrild. And they're interesting to compare. Torkel Bjørnvigs poems appeared in the 70s and was the first to take up the question of environment and pollution, as we mentioned it back then. And it's interesting to compare him and his poems to newer literature. Here's a poem of Torkel Bjørnvig, just a short stanza from it, back from the 1975. And he protested heavily and political poems against what was happening to the environment. No need to panic, they say, those that can still afford swimming pools and oxygen tanks, cars and planes to secured areas, places where the plague of substances is not raging yet. No need to panic, say those who, freed from the earth clumping of too much human commitment and wait weightlessly, hoover around in no man's land and control rooms of the ruling, the communication decision of the state and the globe decision. This was political poems protesting, and the reactions were strong. Some sympathized with him and said, wow, that's something new, that's important. And others simply laughed, and some thought it had changed and he had ruined his poetry by writing these poems. It was very strange that actually people laughed when he read aloud his poems on dying birds in an environmental catastrophe. They started making sounds like hens. Gok, 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 gok. They sat there saying, although this was so tragic of all these, the birds and the environment that went down. And the political poems, they are still here. The political protest in poems are still very important, but things have also changed and new things have occurred. And it's interesting to compare it with the books of Jonas Eika and Rachel Haslund Gjerrild. Jonas Eika's short stories, they give us the images of a post-catastrophe world, a post-apocalyptic world where the catastrophe has occurred. And it's frightening, this world, but it's also in a way a kind of new beauty that appears. in one of the stories, he describes this post-apocalyptic world. The sky slides into a darker blue with black at the edge. The beach curves reddish to the west. We follow it and reach a headland from where we can look out over the sea to both sides. It abounds in parasol, pushing the blue of the sky back. The yellow along the horizon fades out. On all sides, the earth flares up in a mild orange light that suggests it's rounding in the black morning. The black morning, that's frightening. And the people in one of the characters says, "Come, let's go into the land." Wonderful and very frightening and thought-provoking collection of short stories. And just a short quotation from Rakel Haslund-Gjerild's novel, All the Birds of Heaven, where she describes a young girl that is alone on Earth after a war or perhaps an environmental catastrophe. She has survived. She collects food. She collects things that can shelter her and take care of her. But she is alone, and she survives, but she loses her language. And what happens then? You'll have to read the novel to find out. But here's just a short quote. "The tongue is withered in her mouth. She's like a fish at the bottom of the boat. Jaws that open and close, but without a sound." I'll turn to narrative medicine, which is also one of my research interest and field that I've been very much engaged in. And narrative medicine, it's a recent field of research and teaching that stems from interdisciplinary interest in personalized medicine, and the field is perceived as one of the most innovative in the medical humanities. And here at SDU, we have developed the narrative medicine as a field of research and teaching in an interdisciplinary cooperation between health science and the humanities. And this anthology that will appear in already is published in Danish, but will also appear in English, is the first introduction in Danish to the field of narrative medicine, with contributions not just of Danish researchers or Nordic researchers, but of foreign leading researchers. And I've had the pleasure of editing it with some colleagues, and I've also written an article in cooperation with my colleague, Associate Professor Annette Grønning, who's a specialist on e-consultations and studying this field of what happens, what kind of text is it that we send to our doctors, what text do we receive, what can these texts tell us about ourselves and our relation to our illnesses and to ourselves and to the doctor, our doctor. And it's very interesting to study these e-texts, these e-cons texts. They're full of interesting metaphors, and the way patients plot their illness narrations. It's also very, very interesting and tells a lot of how we see ourselves. And the idea with this essay is that hopefully we can be better to listen to one another, that the doctors, the general practitioners can be better to listen to us as patients, and that we as patients also can learn to express ourselves and learn when we send an email to our doctor. I'm also part of two very interesting research projects, DARK 3, that is managed by Professor Kåre Christensen, and it's about aging. And what I study here, along with other very good colleagues, is late life fiction. And we study how elderly characters are described in contemporary literature. What does this tell us about our conception of the last year of our lives? And I'm also part of Associate Professor Maja Thiele's great project, Decide. That is a project that has a goal to reduce disease and death from alcohol-related and non-alcoholic fatty liver diseases. And what we do as literary researchers is that we are trying to use narrative medicine to reduce the stigma towards liver disease, alcohol, and obesity. The patients are often met with these prejudices against their illness, their liver disease. So we try to use narrative medicine to reduce this stigma towards liver disease, alcohol diseases, and obesity. We've had wonderful experiences with narrative medicine these last 5 years. We have very nice conferences and visits. I think very early we had Rita Sharon visited us along with David B. Morris, and this was a kind of, gave us a feeling of the importance of narrative medicine and how far we perhaps could reach with this research area. I should shortly mention that narrative medicine is also part of our educations here at SDU. We have a mandatory program for medical students, and this summer we just we had the opportunity to host the Medical Humanities Summer Institute in collaboration with Columbia University. Now, how do I link narrative medicine to my last topic, the songwriting of Bob Dylan? How do I get there? It might seem difficult, but it's actually easy. A 2015 study found that Bob Dylan was quoted or paraphrased in 213 articles in biomedical journals. So that's actually a lot. And it has also been discovered that a Swedish group of biomedical researchers simply smuggled Bob Dylan quotations into their articles and did it for years. So there was this link between them that they did this. Of course, it's jokes and coincidence, but it also, to me, indicates that there are inspirations from art to science and from science to art, and this interests me. And in this case, I use Bob Dylan to try to follow this inspiration between art and science. Here at DIAS, we have a small pilot project called Challenging Ideas and Scientific Curiosity, where I work together with several colleagues on trying to develop our interdisciplinary cooperation and research. And one of the things that we've been doing, we have a lot of plans coming up, but we started out with a panel at the Tulsa University celebration of Bob Dylan's 80th birthday, which was a major event, and we managed to bring in a panel called Tangle Up in Bob Dylan, where we discussed these inspirations between science and art in the case of Bob Dylan. And Professor Peter Van Huyse, who's a part of DIAS, gave a wonderful talk and on social science and how Bob Dylan has been some kind of inspiration to him, not directly to his research, but as a kind of existential basis to all what he had been doing also as a researcher. And it was from Albrecht University, sexologist Professor Christian Gravgaard, who discussed how his view of sexology and ideas in this field actually had been inspired by some of Dylan's songs and his way of being open to these questions that engage Christian. And we also invited the artist Michael Falk to discuss the inspiration that he had received from Dylan, and Professor Richard F. Thomas from Classical Studies at Howard University gave a short speak on how he feels inspired by the way Dylan approaches the classics and learn from his use of classical poems in his own research. It's an inspiration to him, simply. And we published these talks in a small journal called Aktualitet, so you can read them and see already what they discussed in their presentations. Very interesting too was that this panel gave us an access or a connection. We were connected all of a sudden with Professor Sean Villens, who's a leading American historian specialized in the Civil War, and he gave a wonderful talk on how he, as a historian specialized in Civil War, really was inspired and by Dylan's songs on the Civil War, and thought he'd get a new understanding of his research topic in this way. And I hope to invite him here to Dias so that he can tell us more about his research in the American Civil War and how art has inspired his understanding of the Civil War. I also contributed to this volume edited by Sean Latham at Cambridge University Press, an anthology of the world of Bob Dylan, and my contribution was about Dylan's songs as world literature. And it's rather interesting to see how many sources there are in world literature for Dylan's songs. It's not just the classics. He's full of quotations of Homer and Ovid, and a lot of poets from the classic poetry, but also, of course, of Walt Whitman, of Verlaine, Rimbaud, Bertolt Brecht, Shakespeare, the Grimm brothers that he also felt so attached to. So there are so many inspirations from world literature in his songs. Also, some that are just being discovered by chance, perhaps. It seems that he has quoted a lot of stuff from a Japanese novel, and it was this plagiarism. It's a word that is very dangerous to use in relation to Dylan, but the Japanese author, he was simply very happy of being quoted by Dylan. This gave his novel a success. So it's a very wide horizon of art and literature that you find in Dylan's songs. So it was easy to discuss these songs as world literature. I think we need to have time for questions and discussion. So I'll just turn to Dylan's latest album, Rough and Rowdy Ways, from 2020. And Rough and Rowdy Ways, the ways of research, you all know, can be rough and rowdy indeed, and but you can feel inspiration and have inspiration from art and literature and from songbook like Bob Dylan's. I Contain Multitudes, that was the title of this lecture, and it's also a title of one of the songs in Rough and Rowdy Ways, I Contain Multitudes. And I think I share the experience of the value of the diverse, and as a researcher, I feel best when I have a lot of different projects going on that inspire each other, contradict each other, and when I can combine different theoretical frameworks. And I'm going to show you a video of this I Contain Multitudes, one of the songs of that Bob Dylan has on his album Rough and Rowdy Ways. And this video is made by a filmmaker called Bob Morey. It is a bit naive, I should say. I think it's a bit naive, but it also shows how an artist can get hooked on this song so that he has to do something. He simply has to make a short film, and you'll see the results in a minute. But I'll just sum up this lecture, and I'll do it by remembering my old colleague here at SDU, the philosopher Jørgen Hass. He taught me that a lecture should only introduce 2 ideas, no more. And today I've tried to follow his advice. So the first idea of my lecture today is that literature contains multitudes. And the second is that it's interesting and important to me to study how these multitudes are used. So now comes the song I Contain Multitudes, and the video is made by Bob Morey. Yes, thank you for your attention. Thank you.
So we have time for questions. You can pass around a microphone, I believe. Yeah. Up in the back there.
Yeah.
So thank you, that was fascinating. I'm just visiting, but just hang on.
For our online listeners.
Jeg skulle måske have slukket den der.
I think it's fine. It's from that camera up there.
Yeah.
Hi, sorry. Can you hear me?
No. Sorry. I don't know whether perhaps it doesn't. Yeah, it's the lights on.
Sorry, so I'm visiting. Thank you for a wonderful lecture. One of the struggles we're having, I'm based at a university in England, is how we incorporate different voices in terms of global literature.
Yeah.
And how we think about the other. And so I was wondering, in terms of Danish literature, is there a route to incorporate different voices from around the globe into our narrations?
Yeah.
In England in particular, because of our very contested imperial past, we're trying to address this now, knowing that our literature hasn't really contained the multitude of voices.
Yeah, yeah.
So I just wondered what the state was in Denmark.
Yeah, you're right about that, and it is important not to reconstruct an old kind of national construction of literary history, but I think also the actor network idea helps me to show the international influences on Danish literature and literature written in Danish, and also to maintain and show that Danish literature has also been written in German in the 18th century. And so you're right about that. But if I think this Rita's approaches gives me ideas to create an open field where influences can be studied, and also Nordic literature can be included in the analysis. So, but you're quite right. And when it comes to, for instance, the influence of Bob Dylan to Danish poetry, it's also important to stress that he actually has been influential, not just to a few songwriters, but to authors of his generation and the following generations too. You can find in new books of poetry quotations of Dylan. So you're quite right. That's a major concern and interest, and something that we should really be aware of, that the concept of multitudes also shows us influences and interweaving between several countries and languages. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, for a really beautiful and interesting, very interesting talk. I think I got the 2 points, that there are many users, a multitude of users of literature, and you're interested, not only interested, but have done really fascinating research into those users. And so I'm wondering whether you could say anything about patterns of those users, whether that following in the actor network theory, following the actants and their users, do you see any patterns in the multitudes? For example, are there ways of being used within narrative medicines that you don't see in Dylan's work popping up in scientific literature? Well, that was just sort of to put the extremes, but can you say anything about the patterns you might have found?
Yeah, there are different patterns, and there are patterns that also change a lot. For instance, readers' involvement in conversations with authors and readers, the whole exchange between authors and readers as actors has really changed with digitalization and social media. 50 years back, it was you could meet an author at a reading, a public reading, where perhaps Torkild Bjørnvig stood up and read his poems aloud, and people laughed at him. That was a reaction he got then. But today there is an intersection between readers and authors in social media, and you also see that some readers have become so important in this dialogue of how to, for instance, which cover should a new novel by Leonora Christina Skov, a Danish author, have. She discusses this with her readers. What shall I choose? Shall I choose this photo or the other one? And they have a saying. So it's a very direct influence. And then she gives back to them, for instance, photos of her of the part of her private life that she hasn't described in her novels. So you can see, you can have a photo of her mother and of a Christmas in the family that she gives back to the readers when they respond to her. So there's a lot of dialogue and a lot of exchange going on, and readers are influential actors, actually. You could also see it in social media in general. So there are patterns in different areas, and I can see the historical change within certain areas, but whether they resemble one another, that's an open question still to me. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the lecture. It's really an impressive project, the uses of literature, and in a way it's also a little bit a paradox, I think, because as you define literature, it has sort of this aspect of being non-instrumental.
Yeah.
And that is also somewhat a common trope of modern aesthetic theory, that art literature is free, autonomous, non-instrumental, can do its own coding, so it doesn't have to make sense. But then you nevertheless use it. You nevertheless do something with it. And I'm very interested in that because I'm trying to do similar things. And I was just wondering if you maybe could say a little bit more, how did you make the use non-instrumental? I mean, how did you argue for it? That it's not instrumental, that it is
trying to remember that. I think we simply try to remember that literature is used all the time. If you take down a book from the shelf, you're already starting to use it. You use it to read. So use can't escape literature. It's literature that's used and uses. But of course we do not want to end up in a kind of instrumentalization of literature. The poet Søren Ulrik Thomsen warned in a journal article for, I think, a year or two ago, that you should not use my poems as a kind of pill against headache or heartache or whatever it is. Don't do that. I hate that. But I don't think we any of us support this idea. Of course, we're in for narrative medicine and the use of literature in difficult existential situations where you are ill or where you stand in a change in your life. But that's not the same as regarding literature as some kind of cure. And we, in narrative medicine, we do not consider literature and workshops to be a therapy. We keep out of that. I don't know nothing about therapy, but I know something about reading and sharing an experience of a valuable work of art. So we're very conscious about it, and I think that's needed. Yeah.
Any questions? questions. I think we have a question as well from online, one of our online viewers, from Christine Ben, who's obviously a researcher at DIAS.
Yeah.
And she writes that as a vaccine researcher, I would like to share another feature of literature that I heard from Politiken's editor, Lena Vissing. And the line is, literature is a vaccine. One gets exposed to a tiny bit of the deadly, and that prepares one well for meeting the deadly in real life. I guess, do you have a comment?
I think that's an interesting consideration to me, Christine Ben's remarks. Yeah. And I think she did a wonderful job on engaging students here at SDU in writing about the future, in fiction, in essays, and so on. So a way of showing that you can gain a certain knowledge from reading and writing, and a knowledge that you perhaps won't gain in your daily practice as a researcher. You need this new genre, this other genre, this special media to gain this knowledge. But interesting consideration to me. Yeah.
And we have a question in the audience too.
Yeah, I can shout really loud.
It's because we are still online with.
Yeah, Anne-Marie, it's a very inspiring talk. Yeah, but I have one comment and one question. Yeah, my comment it is, and your dad is actually right. To be a medicine chemist is also a good choice.
Yeah.
And my question is that I see you spreading a lot of research in the different angles. And do you think is there any possibility that you can collect the literature and with the experimental science and to do some work together?
Yeah. Yes, actually, I do think so, because several contemporary authors are doing so. For instance, the author Amalie Smith, who is very inspired by Lene Haug's research, and also by the history of the computer that she has described in her latest book. So there's this interest in being inspired directly from science and getting inspiration in a dialogue with scientists. So, and it's it's a trend among the young authors, I think, to get into dialogue and get contacts with scientists. Also because they are so engaged in the environment and the climate crisis. That's a very major concern of Danish poets. So that's also why they're interested in this dialogue and learning from one another, I think.
Thank you.
Great. Well, if there are no more questions, I think that actually puts us at time. And so please join me in thanking Anne-Marie again for her talk. I like the video, actually. It was very, I love that song. So
yeah, it's